Imagine being told in an airport that you are unacceptable.
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 Not that you are unwelcome, not that your paperwork is wrong, but the country you called home for so long, the one printed on your passport and stamped on your visa, has ceased to be recognized. You cannot go back to your country, you cannot enter the United States, you must simply wait. This was the reality of Viktor Navorsky, an immigrant of the fictional country of Krakosia.
Krakosia.
On the surface, it feels like a charming fish out of water story, a cart full of crackers, a timely love story, and an insanely comical accent.
What happened?
Eat shit.
What?
Eat shit.
Eat shit?
Eat shit.
What happened?
However, we must look closer to the film's construction, specifically how Spielberg frames Victor against the geometry of the JFK airport. Through analyzing the screenwriting, theatrical elements, and editing, we see that Tom Hanks plays a man who never raises his voice and somehow dismantles an entire bureaucracy. It leads us to ask a question about the relationship between Frank Dixon, the airport's director who won't let Victor leave, and Victor. What does the relationship between Dixon and Victor reveal about how systems of power are sustained? Answering this question is important because it tells us that ordinary people are not powerless. It also tells us that engagement is a form of resistance. Which is why I argue that the relationship between Dixon and Victor demonstrates that bureaucratic systems are sustained through control and break down when individuals engage with the system rationally instead of passively. In this movie, The Terminal, Victor reads the rules more carefully and finds accidental loopholes. And this is where Dixon loses in the confrontation. But he doesn't just lose that, he loses authority and his bureaucratic hierarchy. So, let's go back to The Terminal. Let's watch how one man can beat this whole entire system. The first aspect of delving deep into my argument is analyzing the screenwriting. Screenwriting encompasses a variety of things. It holds the character arcs, plot developments, and dialogues. One of the scenes explicitly representing the theme of following bureaucratic systems is the I wait scene. After Frank Dixon notices Victor Navorsky living in the airport with his bathrobe and brushing his teeth, he decides to tempt Victor into escaping illegally. The caveat was to catch him using the camera surveillance system.
Where is he? Where is he?
Yeah, left, to the left.
No,
Here.
he was just at the door.
Right, if we just go a little left.
All right.
I wait.
This develops both the plot and the conflict between the two characters. Dixon believes that bureaucratic systems rely on obedience. He expects Victor to act impulsively and break the rules. However, Victor refuses to leave wrongfully and instead says, I wait. His response shows rational thinking rather than passive aggressiveness. Dixon becomes increasingly frustrated because Victor's approach prevents the bureaucratic system from functioning the way Dixon intends. In this scene, not much dialogue is transmitted between the characters. However, we understand the plot through the characters' actions. We experience dramatic irony. When Victor says, I wait, the audience realizes he is not naive, challenging the irony just experienced. It begins to evolve his character arc from an inarticulate man to a rule-based. Later in the movie, Dixon removes Victor's access to resources. Dixon assumes that hunger and desperation will eventually force him to break the rules and run through the airport doors illegally. Let's take a look.
No quarters, no food. I'll give him a few days before he barrels through those doors in clear violation of Section 214. Then he's somebody else's problem.
Sir, why don't we...
The repetition in Dixon's dialogue itself shows the mechanical logic of a bureaucracy. Everything is treated like a chain of systems with little regard for human dignity and perspective. Rather than barreling through those doors, Victor finds a job, and this greatly affects Dixon. Earlier in the film, Dixon used bureaucratic laws to strip Victor of his identity. But Victor finally succeeds and earns more than Dixon. He dismantles the entire bureaucratic system by finding a job he wasn't supposed to have. The theatrical elements in this terminal strongly present my argument. While screenwriting relies mainly on dialogue and plot elements, theatrical elements rely on body language, tone, facial expressions, and blocking. At the start, Victor is confused and powerless. Tom Hanks uses hesitant movement, limited eye contact, and a quiet tone to show vulnerability. In contrast, Stanley Tucci presents Dixon as calm and controlled through strong posture, direct eye contact, and formal speech. The blocking reinforces Dixon's authority, often placing him behind desks and barriers that represent institutional control. As the film continues, Victor learns how the system works and begins to navigate it rationally. He does not really change his character, but instead becomes more knowledgeable about the rules and how to use them to his advantage. This allows him to move through the bureaucracy in ways Dixon does not expect. Dixon becomes more frustrated, his tone sharper, and his body language less composed as Victor gains influence within the system. Dialogue also shows a shift. Dixon starts calm and procedural because he trusts that the bureaucracy and his authority will get Victor out. He treats Victor like an administrative case. Victor's speech begins broken and uncertain, but he gradually becomes more fluent as he learns the system. By the end, Victor appears more confident in navigating the airport, while Dixon's frustration shows the loss of control. Editing is another key element that supports my idea directly. While theatrical elements show performance, editing shapes how the story feels through pacing, rhythm, and transitions. At the start, editing is structured and orderly. It matches the airport's bureaucracy. It shows that no one can really get through it. There are clear, logical cuts and that show that Victor is being processed like part of the system. However, as Victor adapts, the editing becomes more dynamic. There's cross-cutting to show different parts of the airport happening at the exact same time, especially between Victor's actions and Dixon's attempts to monitor him. The cross-cutting is shown most well in the cart scene. Longer and more focused shots also begin to appear, especially around Victor's actions, emphasizing his growth and independence. At the same time, Dixon's authority feels weaker when placed in contrast through editing, as the audience sees Victor working around the system without directly challenging it. This is called movie magic. Overall, the editing shows the bureaucratic control depending on how the events are structured and presented, and as Victor becomes more knowledgeable and confident, that control starts to break down visually. What the terminal ultimately reveals is that bureaucratic power is like a language, and like any language, it can be learned. Dixon doesn't lose authority because Victor is louder, he loses authority because Victor finds the quarters in the cart machine. He waits when Dixon needs him to run. And that's Spielberg's sharpest point. The most dangerous person inside any institution isn't the revolutionary attack from the outside, it's the patient man sitting inside.